Hello everybody, my name is Diana Feuerbach. I would like to welcome you to our B3 panel discussion, In the Mood for Change, Film and Media Funding Now and in the Future. Should we push the reset button? Before we get started, I would like to introduce my guests. First of all, we have Adrian Wootton from London. Adrian, you are the Chief Executive of Film London, the agency charged with developing the screen industries in the British capital. And you're also the Chief Executive of the British Film Commission, the organization responsible for promoting the UK as the best place to produce feature films and high-end television. It's good to have you, Adrian. Up next, we have Anna Schöppe. Anna, you're the Managing Director of Hessen Film and Media, which means you're responsible for funding film and media projects in the German state of Hesse. And just in case not everyone in the audience has heard that name before, the biggest city in Hesse is Frankfurt, with the big airport, and Frankfurt is also where you have your office. Welcome, Anna. And last but not least, we have Helge Albers joining us from Hamburg. Helge, you're the Managing Director of Filmförderung, which means film funding, Hamburg, Schleswig-Holstein, which means your geographical area of responsibility covers the northernmost federal state of Germany. Thank you for joining us. A rather simple question for starters, and I will be asking each one of you, what was or what has been the biggest challenge in your work this year? Maybe we'll start with the lady, Anna.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation. Yeah, I think I've only started my job at Hessen Film on 1st of May this year. So I started in the high Corona pandemic situation. And but before I want to say anything about personal challenges in this time, I think it's really important that everyone who works in the public sector right now is quite privileged. And it was difficult because, I mean, no project was shooting at that point, no cinema was open, and everyone in the office was at home. But we took the challenge, and I think we started quite well together. But one of my goals was to get in closer contact with all the filmmakers in Hessen, which is difficult if you can't meet anyone. So we needed to find new formats to do this anyway, and I think that also worked out. And then I think that were like personal challenges, and I think on a professional level that the biggest challenge is yet to come. I mean, we did some programs and we tried to do some helping programs, one together with all the other German funding institutions, like Hamburg is one of them, for all the movies that had to break up that shooting process, and we did some helping programs for the cinemas, but I think we will have to do a lot more next year and go on, and there's a big challenge to come for all of us, I think.
Thank you. Adrian, what has been your biggest challenge in your work?
I think it's the same for everyone, really. I mean, it was the suspension of production. You know, we had something like nearly a couple of £1 billion worth of production in various states, hundreds of thousands of people. And by the first week of March, it had all stopped and all those people were unemployed. And we had £1 billion of production frozen on studios across the UK. So our challenge was, how do we get it started again? How do we do this safely? What do we do in terms of the whole health and safety protocols, guidance, and coming up with a recovery plan? And that's really what we spent sort of 5 months doing. I mean, we wrote the guidance with a kind of gigantic industry consultation, domestic and international, for working safely on sets, on location, etc. And that was certainly the biggest consultation exercise I've ever been involved in every aspect of the workforce through, and we had to get it cleared through all the kind of health and safety, Public Health England, the medical opinions of all the government departments to publish it. And on top of that, there was the whole issue of insurance or lack of insurance, and the negotiations with the government on producing an indemnity production restart scheme, and also about quarantine and quarantine regulations and quarantine exemptions. So it's all kind of massive kind of technical logistical exercise that we just spent months and months and months on, and eventually we got these particular things in place. And so we've gone from a position where nothing was shooting at all apart from news and current affairs to where I think today we've got something like 85% of what was shooting back, either shooting or in pre-production, and most of the people involved in the industry, after a really, really tough period of incredible hardship for the freelance workforce, going back. Cinemas, I'm sure we can talk about this, cinemas and the actual means of exhibition is in a very different state. But as far as production is concerned, the challenge was, how do we get it back? How do we get it back safely? And we've done that. There are big time and big money issues associated with doing so. It's costing a lot more time and a lot more money to do it, but it is back up and running, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that the rigor with which we put these things in place is so tight and so tough in terms of testing and guidance that it'll carry on, and that's what we've got everything crossed for, that it will carry on.
Thank you. Helge?
Yeah, I mean, not to repeat all the challenges were mentioned by unfaced. I mean, we were hit by Corona in a time of transition. We used the last year to introduce new guidelines, or to draft new guidelines, and were to implement them in April this year, which we did, but it sort of came with a larger change in our funding processes. So internally, we had a lot of on our plate anyway. Even without Corona, would have been interesting time. Obviously, on top of that, with Corona, dealing with all the immediate challenges that the Corona virus brought with us for the industry, plus the long-term effects. Created an interesting challenge for us as a team. I think it was, I have to say, it was met with a lot of workforce and discipline and motivation by the whole team at our fund. To take a little bit of a wider perspective, I think the largest challenge probably at the moment is to look into the future and to understand how things will pan out. If we think back of February this year, I still see myself at Berlinale in very crowded receptions and in an environment that was absolutely normal as we knew festivals, and 2 weeks later everything was shut down, which shows us how limited our anticipation of the future is. And we could have known, we saw China, and it could have been foreseen in a way, I mean, to whatever extent, and nobody took it that seriously at the time in February, 2 weeks before. So that the learning from that is just to I don't know, to see the imperfection of the human mind and to understand that we are really not that good in sort of foreseeing future scenarios. So to build scenarios that we think might be necessary and to create the necessary policies to meet those challenges is probably the largest challenge at the moment, I think.
Well, so if we look at the headline of our discussion in the Mood for Change, we're already there. We're faced with a tremendous change that was unwanted and it wasn't foreseen. Film and media funding now and in the future. How are you currently, speaking of 2020 and maybe 2021, adjusting your policies? I mean, I figure that probably there's maybe a sort of a backlog on productions. That Adrian mentioned that a lot of them were frozen. So not only do you have the bottleneck that is always there, but maybe you also have a little bit of a traffic jam, that productions were delayed. Now they're underway, okay, but in the meantime, there were new filmmakers coming up with new ideas and submitting new projects. And that's like everything is being pushed back a little bit, scheduling-wise, I imagine. Is that so?
Shall I start? Yeah. In a way that it is like that. I mean, in Hamburg, we were pretty quick after the shutdown, which was not really a very hard shutdown in Germany compared to other European territories, but after everything was slowed down immediately, we introduced a developing program that with the intention to support our producers who were clearly not out of work for the next 6 months. That was foreseeable very easily. So we said, okay, what can we do to give immediate help? And I think that going into development processes and was the right thing to do. So we managed to free up 2 million euros in additional funding just to invest into developing work for our regional producers. And as you said, at the same time, of course, every production schedule was affected, and some productions had to be interrupted, some had to be postponed, and we're now in the process of sort of reshifting and reorganizing the sector. The biggest outcome that I see is that obviously all the freelancers have to make up for the losses in the first half of the year, and between March and let's say June, July. So it's really complicated for independent productions to compete with productions that are on the fast track. If you only have Netflix or a public broadcaster or one financing entity, it's a much quicker process to get back into production than with a patchwork funding of many of the independent productions. So and that competition for talent, for crew is something we see, and we as a fund we can't compensate very much, to be really honest. And this is something we notice and can't influence. It sort of links into a need that we already knew before Corona, the need for qualified personnel and below the line crew that was lacking even before Corona, and it's sort of peaking now as everybody or most of the productions are back on track or just trying to get into their new rhythms. So those are the main takeaways from my side, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Adrian, the numbers you were mentioning were staggering. You had 1 billion pounds worth of productions in a freeze for several months.
Yeah.
And now things have started up again.
They have, and obviously that overwhelmingly that number. But it's kind of that number, the billion on the studios was largely high-end film and television from funded by major studios and the streamers. But there was something like another 600, 700 million, which was domestic television film, because essentially all the broadcasters couldn't shoot any of their regular television series, whether that be a game show or a domestic television drama series, and there were two parts to that. As I said, one part was actually having guidance across everything. From actually, we produced guidance as well with our friends that the British Film Commission worked with. There was visual effects and post-production guidance as well. There was additional broadcaster guidance. There was additional, there was guidance coming out of our ears, really, in terms of actually to give people that confidence that they could restart and the government would approve restart. But the big thing that was holding back domestic television and independent film was the lack of insurance, specifically for COVID-19, and it was the indemnity fund on top of other production insurance that allowed that to go back, and that's covering people until the end of this year. We're waiting to see, and this is down to European state aid regulations, whether that indemnity scheme will be increased, and extended into the first part of next year. But as both Helga and Anna have said, I mean, I think the thing is for the funders, and certainly for there were several things. One was that everyone had to try and keep in touch with the filmmakers and try and support the filmmakers as much as possible, and extending the funds, providing them with extra continuity, providing them with additional support, because even when they've gone back, the costs have gone up because it is much slower when you're having to wear tons of personal protective stuff, social distancing, testing. Then the time of production's gone up, and if the time if the time goes up, then there's two responses to that. Either the production does take longer, or what the producers are having to do is they're actually having to cut the schedule, and with television series, drop episodes, reduce the actual running time of episodes, make all kinds of other creative decisions about that that they wouldn't have done under other circumstances. And the costs just go up because they're having to spend more time in pre-production than they would ever have normally done. And there's a whole training, health and safety training element that has to be built in to apply the guidance. And so our skills training agency, Screen Skills, had to develop a whole separate program based on our guidance that all crew have had to do, a basic level of new health and safety training for COVID-19. So you add the training on, you add the time of pre-production, you add all the additional time it actually makes something, those costs are going up, the time's going up. So it creates all kinds of different challenges for production that we're finding. I mean, as I say, thank goodness, people are rising to that challenge and they are actually shooting in very large numbers right now. Pretty much all our stages in the UK are full, and people are making stuff, but it's hard. It's really hard work for them, and as I say, those costs have got up, and the funders have had to respond to those costs, whether it's broadcasters or public funds. And I think it's a waiting game beyond getting through this backlog and stuff that was already committed to about what will happen in 2021 and how the funds and the way in which that work goes on is adjusted. I mean, the only other thing I'd say, and I'll shut up, is that the other thing that I think has become really important, and this is a positive thing, is that contact in terms of whether it's filmmakers or whether it's crew has become absolutely critical. And there's a new emphasis, I think, on health and well-being, and actually mental well-being, that's come into the kind of production equation, and a new sense of responsibility that I think just wasn't there before. And I think that's a positive thing. I think the necessity to implement health and safety in such a rigorous way has created a new emphasis that our film and television charity here has really been leading on with the British Film Institute. And I think that's a positive thing because people's mental health and general welfare is being focused on probably in a way that I haven't seen in the film and television industry before.
Anna, you mentioned at the beginning that you're still new at the job, and that it was important to you to establish contact with the regional filmmakers. And how was that relationship evolved? I mean, maybe under the aspect that Adrian mentioned, health of the people, the mental health, and also regulations on how to shoot under these circumstances. Do you also have such safety guidelines and measures in place? Do you hand people sheets with rules and how to organize the shoot on the set and so on?
Yeah, we all have the goal to be experts in an area where we haven't been experts before. Like, I haven't cared that much about health, and as Adrian said, that's good that we do care about that now. And yes, we did a seminar for the people, or for the filmmakers in Hessen, where they've learned about hygienic standards on set. And we did like online talks about the ones who started shooting the first, and so they could learn from each other. And then it's like, I mean, in the office, we had to think about this, how many, but that's, I think, the same. We all, in the whole world, we have to think about these problems right now. But I think for the producers in the moment, it's a huge challenge that all these standards can change like every day or week, and they have to make their plans. And Adrian has mentioned this lack of insurance, and we had this problem for like the whole summer. We were talking about that, and we still haven't solved the problem in a whole in Germany, not for all projects. For example, international co-production that do not shoot in Germany, they have no insurance from here. So there are still some problems that we need to talk about. Yeah, and then, but for example, for this, how do I get in contact with the people here? We did something so that I go for a walk with them, because I can't meet them in the office, and I need to talk to them, and I need to get to know them. So I walk with them, and actually, I mean, obviously, I wouldn't have done that if Corona wasn't there, but it's quite a nice thing. And if I ever start a job again, I will go for walks for half a year because, yeah, you can sometimes find little nice spots in it. But yeah, it's difficult.
Helga, are you going for walks along the Alster River?
Yeah, you'll be surprised. I went I cycled. The day after the lockdown, I decided I have to speak to the cinema owners, so I did. I cycled to a cinema each day. Basically, each day of the lockdown after work, I took my bike and just cycled and visited one cinema, just to get a proper overview of what's happening there. And it was in many ways was a good thing. I mean, obviously, and they were very appreciative. First of all, to see that they're hurt. I mean, this is always for everybody in life in general, and certainly in the industry, it's very important for people to feel listened to and heard. And at the same time, it sort of gave me a very good idea of where the cinemas stand at the moment. What they think are the biggest challenges. We developed a regular format with our regional cinemas from that little cycling tour on. It took me about 2 weeks to cycle to every cinema in Hamburg. And then, after that, we created a format from it. So we're in regular exchange with the cinemas. That was one outcome on that end. And obviously, I mean, everybody's talking about it. Also, the work culture, the office culture has changed through COVID, and we had sort of foreseen, and we're on our way to go online, not online, but to go into the cloud and work remote and so on. So we were forced to sort of speed up that process, and I think we're pretty quick in implementing that. So within our own structure, I think we were quite okay in sort of making that shift. So I mean, there's certainly a couple of good outcomes as well. But overall, Anna brought up the co-production aspect, which is one of the big, maybe not losers or not yet losers, but certainly endangered species in the production world as we see it now is co-productions, international co-productions. In ways, we see that they have a very hard time to get distributed, especially now to get distribution funding. Anna mentioned the indemnity fund on the German side that is also not covering co-productions. So there's those are challenges, and those are at times when we are looking at larger corporations entering the market and being affected by Corona to some extent in a positive way. All the more we have to look at the flip side and see that the variety and the smaller scale films that are usually in the European context produced as co-productions are indeed under threat, I think, and have to be looked at very carefully. And we have to understand how they travel and how they are financed and how they can be produced.
Well, what other changes or challenges do you see in the near future? There are maybe technological aspects that you might like to discuss, or socio-political aspects.
I mean, I think in terms of leaving aside socio-political for a moment, I mean, in terms of technological aspects, I mean, I think it's a fact, and this is not just for massive high-end television and film, but it is for independent film as well. It's a fact there's going to be less location shooting. It's a fact that people will shoot for less time. It's a fact that people will use more digital technology. I mean, it's interesting in the UK and I think in other places. I mean, there is a real. I mean, with a big cluster we have in London of visual effects and some of those big companies. The push towards more virtual studio space and more digital production is really being accelerated. There's a whole bunch of companies that are developing virtual studio spaces because it's just likely that there's going to be less and less location shooting and less, because it's a more difficult environment to control, particularly in terms of public health and safety. Whereas in a studio, I mean, at the moment, you can't get into one of our film or television studios unless you go through a really, really rigorous process, and you have to, you are tested at the door, and people in our film studios are being almost tested. They're not being tested daily, but they're almost being tested daily. And obviously it's a different environment and location. So I think digital, the push towards even more digital production and virtual production is definitely going to be an emphasis. We're going to see both in high end, but also in lower budgeted domestic and independent features as well, because I just think the circumstances of stuff that, leaving indemnity assurance on its own, but health and safety risk assessments, people are going, is that a really good idea? Can we shoot in that environment with all those different variables of risk? So certainly I think that's a factor. And I mean, going back to what Helga was saying about cinemas, and we have a thing in London called the Film Hub, which is an association of 250 cinemas, which works with a whole BFI national network called the Film Audience Network of Independent Cinemas. And they're bleeding, they're in real trouble. And you wonder about independent film in this context, which struggles to find a place in the marketplace anyway, and Helga's right about co-production too. Without those outlets being fully up and running, is there space on the streamers? You don't see that much space on the streamers for independent film. So I think it's a real challenge for that funded independent production that may be largely publicly funded, not just in the UK but all over Europe.
To find distribution, to find a way to their audiences.
Yeah, anything, every aspect of it. I mean, if you look at the financing plans, the market is so weak. I mean, if you see which minimum guarantees are coming in from distribution, from world sales, the commitment of television you see in independent film, plus now the exhibition sector, it's just a very weak set of ingredients. So public funding kind of remains, but it's an open secret. I can speak for Hamburg. We are looking at 5% in income in the next couple of years, up until 24. I hope we can stay at the level we're operating at the moment. So it has to affect what's happening in the sector, and I mean, we are. I think one of our responsibilities is to ensure that there is a versatile and variable production landscape and exhibition landscape. So we will look into how to compensate. But at the moment, the compensation looks very much at public funding only at the moment. So and that's going to make it a very competitive environment, even more competitive than it was before. And it's going to be tough decisions.
Yeah, and we don't really know, like, most of the movies that we fund are movies from, like, they have a budget between 1 and 8 million euros, so they are rather small, but not really small or not really independent because they are funded. And I think that are the movies that have the biggest problem to be seen in cinemas right now, because there will still be a place for the big worldwide blockbuster event movie. They will find their audience in theaters, and the pretty small films with a really specific audience, they might also, but all the ones in between, all the European or international co-productions, they need, like, art house cinema is their place to go, and we don't know really how the future for that looks. And I mean, like, we discussed a lot, and I haven't cycled to the cinemas, but I think it's a really nice idea, and maybe I should. Also, Hessen is
good luck in Hessen. Yeah, those are long trips. Yeah.
We have 70 art house cinemas all over Hessen, but I mean, in the Frankfurt Rhein-Main area, most of them can survive because they have their audience in the neighborhood and they are specialized and stuff like that. But we also have cinemas like in regions where you already now have 30 or 35 kilometers to go to the next cinema. So if we lose them, there will be no cinema culture in these areas. And so we need to find a way for them.
What if the the cinema culture, as you call it, were to change as well, if you can't really go to the cinema physically because it's too far away or because of COVID-19, maybe those local cinemas can also have some sort of a digital strategy that they might offer streamings and online ticket sales to the people who are their core audiences in the smaller towns, for example. Is there something, I mean, is there, because obviously those cinemas, independent cinemas, art house films, they need to come up with some ideas, because probably we're still looking at another year, hopefully not, of restrictions, and maybe audiences even lose their taste for going out to the movies. Maybe habits will change to an extent that we still cannot really foresee.
Well, I don't know what it's like in Germany, but certainly in the UK, I mean, even if you leave aside the commercial circuits and all the noise, and understandable noise about James Bond moving to next year and all the Disney films being pulled out of the schedule, which is leading to large scale cinema chains mothballing and closing down. Even if you just focus on the independent sector, I know from our conversations with where I came from, with the cinema exhibition and cinemas I opened and run, and friends of mine who are running cinemas, and now that there's been a fantastic amount of public support. There's a cultural recovery fund with millions of pounds in it being distributed by the BFI to keep those cinemas running, to allow them to reopen. But the truth is that even though most of our screens reopened, I think 90% of the screens in the UK reopened about 3 weeks ago, 80% of sites, 90% of screens. On a conservative estimate, the best that they were doing was something like 20% of what their normal business would be, in a combination of the fact that, because of all the social distancing guidelines and not being able to have their full capacity, but also because actually, the product is limited, but B, this is really important, I think, is people are still scared. People are still scared. And we've been encouraging and working with cinemas to put little films on their website showing the degree to which they're applying guidance and health and safety and cleansing, etc., etc. But I talk to people all the time that just still aren't comfortable with it. It
seems like an unnecessary risk to take, right?
Exactly. So you've got a sort of triple whammy: product, capacity, and audience nervousness. Am I really going to go there with my partner? Am I really going to go there with my family? And most people aren't. So I think the situation with cinemas is very different from production, and I think the situation with cinemas is probably going to get worse before it gets better, I think.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, Diana, I think it's nice if cinemas can profit from online distribution as well. But what we need to do is that people remember that a cinema is more than a comfy chair and a screen, and that is quite hard in times of Corona. So we did a really small program which will not save the cinemas in Hessen or anywhere, but we did a program for open air cinema over the summer and founded that. And that worked out quite nice, and all the money went to the cinemas, and we had 250 people every evening. So which is in that times, because it's the same in Germany, it's 20 or never more than 25% as audience.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is that, the theatrical sector, generally our industry, and I think the theatrical sector in particular is a very conservative industry. And that conservative industry is forced to go into a transition process that took any other industry years to understand and realize. It doesn't matter if it's music industry or if it's retail or, you name it. Each of these industries had to understand how to address their audiences digitally, how to define models, how to define regulation frameworks, policies, and so on. In order, I think, and it's probably a question of survival and in order to survive, I think the theatrical industry has to go through and that transition process extremely fast. And that means a shift in the mindset of the exhibitors. It means there have to be tools that allow the entire sector to harmonize and to find common understanding of what it means to operate as a digital industry. It means policy making. The legal framework has to be there, which it isn't at the moment. So there's massive challenges, and I'm completely with Adrian in seeing that challenge is going to be huge. It's so far buffered, and for the independent theatrical sector, it's buffered by public money at the moment, and we will continue buffering it for as long as we can. And in the long run, I think it won't change. And you know, I think we really have to say goodbye to a mindset that gives us any hope to go back to a previous stage. There won't be any going back to any previous stage. Whatever happens after Corona, it's going to be that. And there's not going to be a situation that's going to be anything like the situation before Corona. Mm-hmm. So, and then we, as an industry, I think we need to take on that challenge to design what it should look like, and the whole aspect of designing and not only preserving is very important, I think, and that's sort of the biggest task in terms of cinemas as well. I mean, operating digitally, yes, of course, some cinemas might be savvy and can put up a Vimeo link if they're legally allowed to show the films online. It won't save it, because that's, you know, you have to be visible, you have to be, you have to have eyeballs. People have to understand where to see those films. Cinemas can't go into a price dumping situation, so there have to be clear conditions under which the theatrical market shows films in a possible window that's reserved for the market, etc. So there's larger questions to talk about than to just put films somehow somewhere in the digital space. But the questions need to go on. It's important to protect.
I mean, I think here, I completely agree with everything I've just said. I mean, I think certainly one of the ways, and B3 is doing this in terms of this event, but I actually also think that in terms of R&D, research and development, into this change that needs to happen between exhibition and distribution, festivals can have a helpful role to play. I mean, I'm surrounded by paraphernalia from the BFI London Film Festival. I've been recording some introductions for the BFI London Film Festival, and that starts on Wednesday. And it's a hybrid event. It's almost entirely, I mean, I've been involved with the London Film Festival for, nearly 40 years. And this is the first time that it's been presented in this way. It's almost entirely online. There are only 12 cinemas involved around the UK that are showing, I think, 14 movies, but 50 premieres are online. All the introductions, there are no filmmakers in cinemas anywhere. It's everything has been recorded, Q&As, live introductions, panels, everything. And it's going to be very interesting to see. I mean, I think they've done a very good job in curating the structure of it, but it'll be interesting to see how the audience responds to it, because it's entirely like this. Opening nights on Wednesday night, I have my link, and it'll be the first time in my entire life I've not been in the West End of London in literally something like 25 years, sitting in a very large cinema waiting for the opening film to start. And I won't be. I'll be sitting here waiting for my link to open.
It sounds sad.
Yeah, I think it's sad.
But maybe it's just a
great job, but it's sad.
Just different. Maybe it's just going to be different.
Yeah.
So, well, we've already used up most of our time, but let's go a little bit further. Maybe playing a little bit of a fantasy game, considering that we're going to overcome COVID-19 sometime soon, hopefully middle of next year, end of next year. Still, there's going to be changes. If you could have your say in some very specific ways in which you would like to change or evolve or improve the funding practices of your various organizations, what would some of your suggestions be? If you could just dream for a moment and be like, I would like to do this, and that, and this way and that way, and those would be my criteria, those would be my main points. You can think a moment, you know.
Who's first?
Over to you guys.
Playing God. playing funding God.
Criteria. So if I know all that, I could go home and do a rest for this day.
No, well, I think one aspect I mentioned earlier is, of course, to have a sharp look at independent productions and understand how to help them. I mean, I see us as an organization that sort of enables and helps and amplifies and maybe sees itself more as an incubator, and I'm putting a strong emphasis on development, because I think that we are spending too little money on development, where the development processes are not thorough enough. The producers don't earn enough money in the development process in order and are therefore forced to go into production too early. At the same time, we have to be more rigorous in what gets production funding finally. That's a smaller policy, and looking into. Yeah, we'll look into ways how to make the most of our money for the productions. How to become maybe some center of gravity to attract other funds. I mean, as an example, I can give you the cooperation we signed with Warner earlier this year, where Warner Brothers is spending 1 million euros a year into our fund to support regional commercial productions. I mean, commercially driven feature films that are very rooted regionally and so on. And this kind of was a long process that was sort of kicked off by my predecessor, and I took over the process. And I mean, arriving at where we are now, I think we have a little bit of a blueprint of how to go about it and how to attract from work with our fund. That's a model we are looking into in the future. Again, it's sort of that money for commercial productions is a big relief for our regular funds, and therefore also helps the independent market. Mm-hmm. And that's, as far as I can say, I mean, we're still early in the process. We had our third jury session in that fund just now. That's a neat model, I have to say, and I'm looking forward to try to replicate it in some capacity. It won't, every partner has different needs and different agendas, so you can't just copy it, but it sort of works as an cooperative element.
So I think for me, and this is not a complete list of things I would like for the next year, but we are talking a lot about improving financing structures in Germany. You need, for really small movies, you need 5 partners. That is way too much. So I think more money from one funding company and then shorter financing periods is something I really would like to implement here. And then Helge is made a big step in June as the Filmförderung Hamburg-Schleswig-Holstein. They invented a diversity checklist, which no German funding company had before, and we are working on something like that and talk to the Hamburg Filmförderung about it, because I think a more diverse and sustainable industry is really something that we should have worked on 10 years ago, but now we really need to do that, and that has nothing to do with Corona. It's just the time to do. And then I think for Hessen, we need more, or the filmmakers, as Helge already mentioned, they need more time for development. And then when the movie is developed, they need faster decisions. And that's something I hear every week, and we work on that and think how we can get better with faster decisions and not let them wait for half a year, and then they get the answer no, and then they need to find someone else, and then they need 4 more partners, and it takes years again.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, sorry.
Please.
From my point of view, it's not. I guess it's not so much in terms of the technicalities of funding. I think there are two drivers, and actually Anna's mentioned one of them is absolutely is really critical, irrespective of the pandemic, which is diversity and inclusion. And there's a whole, obviously in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, but it's been extremely vocal, rightly so, and very, very much articulated through our different structures and institutions. We're engaged in a diversity review. We have a thing called the Equal Access Network, which is Film London. It has a pool of now 400 young people who we're placing. It's particularly aimed at Black, Asian, minority, ethnic young people, placing them in the workplace in film and television environments in London. We're expanding that work with the Mayor of London. There is a real focus on how are we going to tell more, whether it's, as Riz Ahmed has been saying, I did a thing on a film showing in the London Film Festival, which is in Berlin, Mogul Mowgli. How is more brown? He talks about more brown stories being made, representing more. How more stories about people of color being made. It's a really critical issue for our industry in the UK. I'm sure for everybody's industry, but. And there's no magic wand, but there's got to be a bigger and bigger emphasis on it in terms of the workplace and diversifying the workplace, and also diversifying those stories on screen. Massive emphasis, and also for us, and it is happening, but certainly Germany is much further advanced in this. Is a much greater emphasis on regionalisation and decentralisation, because. It is I mean, whether we like it or not in the UK, it may happen anyway. But the truth is that and this is not just the Boris Johnson levelling up agenda, as it's called, but in terms of, we've seen a huge amount of work driven by high-end television actually happening in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, but also all kinds of English regions that just didn't have film and television activity before. Individual funds are developing there are funds in Yorkshire, there are funds in Liverpool now that there just weren't a few years ago. And so that decentralisation and regionalisation of our funding structures and our production structures is something that there's going to be a bigger and bigger drive for in the UK as well.
We are criticized for that all the time. I think it's like we have papers of why regionalisation is good and needed.
Yeah, they were both laughing.
It comes with its own set of challenges, I think. I mean, there's no perfect world, and there's no, so from the British point of view, I get it, because you want to serve the underserved regions, and you want them. It's all about participation and visibility and so on. So, and that makes total sense. And I know that that's a development that has been happening for a while in the UK with Screen West Midlands and Creative Scotland and so on, and I mean, ideally you avoid a couple of the mistakes that were made in other federal funding systems, but it's if you're part of federal state as we are. It comes with a set of opportunities. It comes with a certain element of competition that can be healthy, or that can complicate things. And it depends on from which side you look at the matter. And I mean, I'm very focused on how to develop our region and support the filmmakers based in our region. Focused on how to develop talent in the region and design the environment as one that makes it attractive for them to work in our region. So we have a very regional focus, but we're always aware that we are part of a bigger network of a national film industry as well. So, and that's a constant process of balancing and defining yourself within a larger system. Well,
things in Germany are complicated. They tend to be, because of the federal structure, and basically in most areas. But that's something that we live with. Unfortunately, I think our time is up. It was a very interesting discussion. Thank you so much for joining. And Anna Schöppe, all the best to you in Frankfurt. Helga Albers, all the best to you in Hamburg. And Adrian, thank you for joining B3 once more, because you've been a guest of the festival before. All the best.
Very fond of B3, and so yeah, good luck with the festival, and hope it all goes really well online, and really nice to meet you all.
Yes.
Likewise.
And
nice meeting you, Adrian.
And fingers crossed that maybe next year we can meet in person.
It would be very nice to be in Frankfurt in person with you all.
Okay, with this...
We'd love to welcome you here.
Yes.
Okay, goodbye to our audience, and enjoy the rest of B3.
Thank you very much.
Yes, bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.